December 25, 2016, Goring-on-Thames, England. While the rest of the world was singing Last Christmas, the man who gave us that song was slipping away in total silence. George Michael died on Christmas Day, alone in his home, at the age of 53. The news didn't just break hearts, it felt like the end of an era of British pop royalty. But as the tributes poured in, a strange thing happened. Stories began to emerge, not about his scandals, his leather jackets, or his chart-topping hits, but about his secrets. Did you know that George Michael once gave £15,000 to a stranger he saw on a TV show who needed IVF treatment? Or that he worked undercover at a homeless shelter, asking the staff to never tell anyone who he was? Now, let's look at the logic flip of his life. George Michael was a man who lived two lives. To the world, he was the ultimate sex symbol, the bronzed god of the 80s with the perfect stubble and the piercing gaze. But behind that mask was a shy, insecure Greek boy named Georgios Kyriacos Panayiotou, who was terrified of the very fame he had chased. He spent decades fighting for the right to be a serious artist. He sued one of the biggest record labels in the world for professional slavery. He stayed in the closet for years to protect his career while his heart was breaking in private. He was a man who had everything, the voice of an angel, millions in the bank, and global adoration. But he was trapped in a gilded cage made of his own image and the world's expectations. How did the boy who just wanted to be the next Elton John become a man who hid from the world? And why did it take his death for us to finally see the saint behind the superstar? This is the Nostalgia Brit. Today, we're looking for the man in the mirror. We're looking for freedom. Bushey Meads School, Hertfordshire, 1975.
Imagine a 12-year-old boy named Georgios Kyriacos Panayiotou. He's chubby, wears thick-rimmed glasses, and is painfully shy. He's the son of a hard-working Greek Cypriot immigrant who wants him to be a doctor or a lawyer. He feels like an outsider in every possible way. Then, in walks Andrew Ridgeley. Andrew is everything Georgios isn't: handsome, confident, and cool. When the teacher asks who will look after the new boy, Andrew raises his hand. It was the most important moment in pop history that nobody saw coming. Now here is the logic flip of Wham. We often remember Andrew as the other guy, the lucky friend who tagged along. But the truth is, George Michael was Andrew's creation. It was Andrew who gave Georgios the confidence to lose the glasses, change his hair, and step onto a stage. Without Andrew's swagger, George Michael might have remained a shy boy writing songs in his bedroom. By 1982, they were Wham. They were the sound of Thatcher's Britain trying to have fun. They wore short shorts, neon colours, and had hair that defied gravity. They sang about Club Tropicana and not wanting to work. They were the ultimate best friend fantasy. But as they became the biggest duo in the world, the Gilded Cage was already being built brick by brick. While Andrew was genuinely having the time of his life, George was beginning to feel the weight of a secret. At 19, he realized he was gay. He told Andrew, and Andrew, being the true friend he was, accepted him completely. But the world of 1980s pop music was a different story. George was the heartthrob. Thousands of teenage girls screamed his name. The record labels and the media had sold a version of George Michael that was the ultimate heterosexual fantasy. He felt that if he told the truth, he would destroy the dream for everyone, including Andrew. I felt like I was wearing a mask that was starting to itch, George Michael on his Wham days. He was 21 years old, at the top of the charts, but he was already living in a lie. He was about to leave the fun of Wham behind to prove he was a serious artist with his album Faith. But in doing so, he was about to step into a spotlight that would eventually become blinding. 1987. The stubble was perfect, the leather jacket was iconic, the Ray-Bans were permanent. Wham was over, and George Michael had officially become the biggest solo star on the planet. His debut album, Faith, sold over 25 million copies. He was winning Grammys, topping charts, and being compared to the likes of Michael Jackson and Madonna. He had achieved exactly what he thought he wanted: total global domination. But here is the logic flip of the Faith era. While the world was obsessed with the sex symbol, George was beginning to loathe him. He realized that the leather jacket and the swagger weren't just an image, they were a commodity. He felt that the music industry didn't care about his soul, they only cared about the product. He was the most famous man in the world, yet he felt like he was disappearing. In 1990, he decided to commit career suicide. At least that's what the label thought. He released the album Listen Without Prejudice Volume 1. The cover, no photo of George, just a black and white image of a crowded beach. The video, for the lead single, Freedom 1990, he refused to appear in the video. Instead, he hired the world's most famous supermodels, Naomi Campbell, Cindy Crawford, and Linda Evangelista, to lip-sync his words. In that video, he literally blew up the iconic leather jacket and the jukebox from the Faith era. It was a declaration of war. He was trying to burn down the Gilded Cage from the inside. This led to one of the most famous legal battles in music history, George Michael versus Sony Music, 1992. George sued his label, calling his contract professional slavery. He argued that they were stifling his artistic growth and treating him like a machine. He lost the case. The judge ruled in favor of the corporation. George was told he had to go back to work for the people he hated. The blow was devastating. He stopped releasing music for years in protest. He had fought for his freedom and found that even with all his millions, the cage was bolted shut.
But while he was fighting the industry, a much deeper, more personal tragedy was unfolding in the shadows, a tragedy that would change the way he looked at freedom forever. Rio de Janeiro, 1991, Rock in Rio 2. George Michael is performing in front of 140,000 people, one of the largest audiences in history. In the middle of that sea of faces, George's eyes locked on to one person, Anselmo, a Brazilian dress designer. George would later say that the moment he met Anselmo, he finally felt like a human being rather than a pop star. It was the first time he had truly, deeply fallen in love. But here is the logic flip of this romance. While George was finding his happiness, he was also finding his greatest fear. Just months into their relationship, Anselmo discovered he was HIV positive. In the early 90s, this was a death sentence. For 2 years, George cared for him in secret. He lived in a state of constant terror, terrified of losing the man he loved, and terrified that the press would find out and out him before he was ready. In 1993, Anselmo passed away. The weight of the closet. George Michael had to do something that is almost impossible to imagine. He had to mourn the love of his life in total silence. He couldn't go to the funeral as the grieving partner. He couldn't talk about his pain in interviews. He had to stand on stage and smile while his heart was literally breaking. I spent the next 3 years in a constant state of grief. I couldn't write a single note. George Michael on the aftermath of Anselmo's death. This is the darkest part of the Gilded Cage. The bars weren't just made of fame, they were made of the 1990s intolerance. He was trapped in a room with his grief, and the world wasn't allowed to see him cry. When he finally did write again, he produced Jesus to a Child. If you listen to that song, you can hear the ghost of Anselmo in every note. For years, the public thought it was just a beautiful, sad song. They didn't know it was a eulogy.
George had lost his freedom in the most painful way possible. He began to spiral into a period of deep depression and drug use, searching for a way to numb the pain that the world wouldn't let him express. But the vultures were still circling, and in 1998, a bathroom in Beverly Hills would change everything. April 7th, 1998, Will Rogers Memorial Park, Beverly Hills. George Michael was alone in a public restroom when he was arrested by an undercover officer for a lewd act. For most celebrities in the 90s, this would have been the absolute end. The Gilded Cage doors were slammed shut, and the vultures of the tabloid press were ready for a feast. The headlines were vicious. "Zip me up before you go." They tried to shame him, to out him as a pervert, and to destroy the sex symbol image he had spent a decade building. But here is the logic flip. George Michael refused to follow the script of a shamed celebrity. He didn't go into hiding. He didn't issue a grovelling apology. Instead, he did the bravest thing a pop star could do. He went on CNN and told the world, "I'm a gay man and I'm not apologetic for it." Then he did something even more iconic. He wrote a song called Outside. In the music video, George dressed up as a police officer and danced in a public restroom made of disco tiles. He turned his arrest into a celebration of sexual freedom. He mocked the police who had targeted him and the public who had judged him. "I'd service the community, but I already have, you see." George Michael, Outside. It was the ultimate screw you to the media machine. He had taken the bars of his cage and turned them into a disco ball. He was finally outside the closet, outside the industry's control, and outside the expectations of the 1980s. He had reclaimed his narrative. But while he had won his freedom from the closet, his body and mind were beginning to buckle under the weight of the years. Epilogue: The Secret Saint and the Final Last Christmas. The final years of George Michael were marked by a tragic symmetry. In 2011, he almost died in Vienna from severe pneumonia, spending 3 weeks in intensive care. When he woke up, he held a free concert for the nurses who saved him. He had survived, but he was tired. On December 25, 2016, the world woke up to the news that the man who gave us Last Christmas had passed away in his sleep. He was 53 years old. His heart had simply given up. But as the world mourned, the biggest logic flip of all was revealed. As soon as he died, the people he had helped began to speak. We learned that the controversial pop star was actually a secret saint. He had paid for a stranger's IVF treatment after seeing her on TV. He had clearing the debt of a stranger he overheard crying in a cafe. He had worked anonymously at a homeless shelter for years, telling no one. He had donated millions in royalties from Jesus to a Child to Childline, helping hundreds of thousands of children. George Michael didn't want the world to know about his kindness while he was alive. In a world of social media and self-promotion, he found the ultimate freedom, the freedom of doing good without needing the credit. He lived in a gilded cage for most of his life, trapped by his beauty, his fame, and the secrets he had to keep. But in the end, George Michael proved that you don't need to be perfect to be a saint. You just need to be real. He finally found his freedom, and he left us a little bit of ours.